Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Imagine for a moment that, well, the very foundation of human society, everything from the money in your pocket to the country you call home, isn't actually built on hard physical reality. Instead, it's constructed from these shared invisible stories, symbols, and beliefs. We call them fictions, and they are far more powerful than you might initially think. Today on the Deep Dive, our mission is to explore how these man-made fictions, what we'll often call simulacra, aren't just, make-believe. They actually overlay our fundamental biological drives. They often reshape them, sometimes even override them completely, giving them this immense, very real power over our lives. We're going to cover some pretty surprising ground today. We'll look at a famous painting of a pipe. You might know the one. We'll touch on AI-generated images of people who don't even exist. And we'll even try to unravel why, say, a bikini is perfectly fine at the beach, but an identical-looking piece of underwear seen on your front porch is, well, definitely not. We'll explore how things like money, nations, and even brands function as these powerful shared fictions that profoundly shape our daily choices. Okay, let's get into this. Let's start with the basics. Maybe what we have in common with every other animal out there. Humans, like all creatures, we share these fundamental biological imperatives, right? We need food, we seek shelter, we have the drive to reproduce, and we establish, social hierarchies or pecking orders. Seems pretty straightforward in the animal kingdom.
That's exactly right. You look at a wolf pack or a troop of chimpanzees, they all have their leaders, their drives for survival, for mating. That's the biological baseline. But what really truly sets humans apart is our unique ability with language. We don't just use it to describe reality like saying there's a lion over there. We use it to invent entirely new realities. This capacity for creating and believing in collective narratives, that's our unique superpower. The historian Yuval Noah Harari makes this point very clearly. He argues that human success on Earth, our dominance, comes from our flexible, large-scale cooperation. And that cooperation is entirely enabled by these shared fictions. They allow millions, even billions of strangers to collaborate as if they were part of the same tribe. No other animal can do that on anything like our scale.
And Harari uses such a striking example for this. Money. I mean, when you stop and think about it, a dollar bill, it's just a piece of paper, isn't it? It has no objective value in itself. Yet somehow people believe in it intensely. And that belief coordinates the actions of billions of people across the globe every single day. How does that actually happen?
It happens precisely because almost everyone believes in the fiction. As Harari points out, those dollar bills or euros or yen, they have absolutely no value except in our collective imagination. But because we share that belief, that piece of paper, or increasingly just digital bits on a computer, can be exchanged for real goods and services. Food, housing, cars. Money is arguably the most successful story humanity has ever told. From a purely biological perspective, trading a cow for a small stack of colored paper seems completely absurd. But from our human narrative perspective, it feels entirely natural. Language is the key tool here, the vehicle for propagating these fictions. It allows us to talk about things that aren't physically present, like your bank balance, or even things that don't objectively exist at all, like a concept like national destiny, or maybe corporate culture, or even sin. The linguist Ferdinand de Saussure highlighted this. He talked about the arbitrary link between a signifier, the word or image, like tree, and the signified, the actual concept or object. Because that link is arbitrary, just based on convention, we can create and agree upon an almost unlimited number of social concepts. And through our collective agreement, they become real in their consequences.
Okay, so we're talking about representations, images, words that can become detached from, or even more powerful than, the reality they initially referred to. That leads us right into this concept of simulacra.
It does indeed. And a classic, really clear entry point is René Magritte's famous 1929 painting, The Treachery of Images. You've probably seen it. It shows a very realistic painting of a smoker's pipe, but underneath it there's the caption, Ceci n'est pas une pipe, which translates to, this is not a pipe. Magritte's point, which seems a bit playful at first, is actually profound and simple. The image of the pipe is not the physical object. You can't pack tobacco into it, you can't light it, you certainly can't smoke it. Think about a national flag. Objectively, it's just a piece of dyed cloth. But as a symbol, as a simulacrum of the nation, it can evoke incredibly deep feelings of patriotism, or, if disrespected, profound insult. The signifier, the painted pipe, the flag, is not the same as the signified, the actual pipe, or the complex entity of a nation. Yet we often react to this signifier as if it were the thing itself.
And this idea, this gap between the representation and the reality, It feels like it's only become more intense with modern technology, hasn't it? What about things like AI-generated images? How do they fit in?
Oh, absolutely. Technology has put this on overdrive. Consider the example of a website called These Nudes Do Not Exist. It was a startup, briefly, that sold AI-generated nude images. The key point is the women depicted literally did not exist. They were entirely generated by an algorithm, just pixels on a screen. Yet these images triggered very real human reactions, arousal in some, moral panic and condemnation in others. There was no actual person being exploited or exposed, but the images still had a tangible social impact. And then you have deepfakes, which take this even further. AI creating fake videos of real people saying or doing things they never did. The representation isn't real, but its impact on reputation, on politics, can be devastatingly real.
So if these images and representations are becoming so powerful, sometimes more powerful than reality, has anyone really dug into what happens when they, I don't know, sort of take over completely, when they almost replace the reality they started from?
Yes, you've put your finger right on it. That's precisely the territory explored by the philosopher Jean Baudrillard. He developed the concept of hyperreality. Baudrillard argued that in our media-saturated world, simulations and images have become so pervasive that they don't just reflect reality anymore, they actively replace it. He described 4 stages of how an image relates to reality. It starts as faithful reflection, then it masks or perverts reality, then it masks the absence of reality, and finally it bears no relation to any reality whatsoever. It becomes its own pure simulacrum. Think of his metaphor of the map overtaking the territory. The representation becomes more important, more real in its effects than the original thing. In this hyperreality, appearance effectively becomes essence. Consider fashion magazines. The heavily photoshopped models, digitally perfected, become the standard of beauty against which real people compare themselves, often feeling inadequate. The simulation dictates the perception of the real, or look at social media. The curated, often idealized images and stories we present online can sometimes matter more to our social standing or even our self-perception than our actual messy, lived experiences. We start living for the representation.
Is there a sort of foundational theory that helps us understand how we manage to attach all these layers of meaning? Going from just a word or an object to something loaded like a national flag or maybe a brand logo.
Yes, the groundwork was really laid by Saussure again, with his idea of the arbitrary sign. Remember, the relationship between the signifier, like the word rose, and the signified, the actual flower, is based purely on cultural convention. There's nothing inherently rose-like about the sound or the letters R-O-S-E. Building on that, the thinker Roland Barthes developed the concept of myth. He argued that society takes these basic signs and adds a second layer of meaning, infusing everyday objects or concepts with broader cultural values and ideologies. He famously used the example of French wine. On one level, it's just fermented grape juice, the signifier signified. But on the level of myth, it signifies French national identity, sophistication, tradition. Barthes said that myth makes history seem like nature, or makes contingency appear eternal. It takes human-made stories and values and presents them as if they were natural, timeless, unquestionable truths. A powerful example is the diamond engagement ring. It feels like an ancient, essential tradition symbolizing eternal love, right? But Barthes would point out that this meaning was largely constructed, relatively recently actually, by incredibly successful advertising campaigns by De Beers in the mid-20th century. A marketing myth became a cultural truth.
Okay, let's try to bring this down to earth with a really relatable scenario. Think about this. A woman wearing a standard two-piece bikini at the beach. Totally normal, nobody bats an eye. But now, imagine that same woman wearing an undergarment that looks almost identical, same shape, same amount of fabric, maybe even the same color, but she's wearing it while, say, getting the mail from her front porch. That would cause stir, right? Maybe even complaints. It's funny, once you start looking for these fictions, they seem to be everywhere. The bikini example is so obvious when you point it out, yet we rarely question why it works that way. So why the difference?
Exactly. It's like we're all participating in these complex social performances without even consciously thinking about the script we've learned. The bikini versus underwear scenario is a perfect illustration. The difference in reaction has absolutely nothing to do with the physical reality. The amount of skin covered is likely the same. It's entirely about the cultural context and the collective fiction we've attached to each item. Bikinis are marketed, sold, and understood as garments for public display in specific settings. Beaches, pools, places associated with swimming and leisure. Wearing one signals, I am appropriately dressed for this context. Underwear, on the other hand, is culturally coded as private, intimate apparel, not meant for public view outside very specific contexts, like perhaps a lingerie fashion show, which itself has its own set of codes. Wearing underwear visibly in a public space like your front porch violates this unwritten social script. It sends a completely different, often jarring, signal. Society has essentially written different costume requirements for different stages or spaces. Violating these fictions, these shared understandings, can trigger real emotional responses, embarrassment for the person, judgment or discomfort from onlookers, maybe even social sanctions, or in some cases legal issues related to public indecency. The fabric didn't change, but the story surrounding it changed everything.
And this idea goes beyond just clothing choices, I assume. What about something like attitudes towards nudity itself? Those vary hugely across cultures.
Hugely. It's another clear example. In some indigenous societies, historically, nudity carried little or no sexual connotation. It was just the natural state of being, particularly in warm climates. Practical, not provocative. But in many Western cultures, influenced by specific religious and social histories, nudity is often highly sexualized and considered taboo. It can provoke moral outrage, censorship debates, and strong reactions. The human body itself is biologically the same everywhere. What differs dramatically is the story, the cultural fiction, that a society tells about nakedness, what it means, when it's acceptable, when it's shameful or titillating. Think about the strange paradox we have with nudity in, say, a classical art gallery versus its depiction in pornography. One is often celebrated as high culture, the other condemned or hidden away, yet both involve viewing exposed human bodies. It's all about the narrative frame, the fiction we impose.
And even language itself seems to follow this pattern, especially with things like taboo swear words, for example.
Absolutely. A swear word is, objectively, just a sequence of sounds, vibrations in the air. Its power comes entirely from the collective fiction, the agreement that this particular sound is offensive or inappropriate in certain contexts. Saying a specific four-letter word in church will likely get you thrown out. Saying the same word amongst friends at a bar might be completely unremarkable, even expected. The sound didn't change, the context did. Sociolinguists call this phenomenon code switching. We all instinctively adjust our language, our tone, even our grammar and vocabulary to fit the unwritten social scripts of different environments. We talk differently in a formal job interview than we do with our close family. Even the existence of euphemisms is, in a way, quite humorous proof of our deep commitment to these language fictions. Saying gosh or darn, and instead of those stronger alternatives, we act as if changing a few sounds makes a fundamental moral difference. It shows just how deeply we live inside these symbolic systems, these shared agreements about what sounds mean.
Okay, so we've seen how these fictions, these simulacra, operate in specific instances in art, with AI, even dictating what we wear or say wear. But let's zoom out now. Let's explore how these fictions manifest on a truly grand scale, shaping some of the most fundamental systems humans have created. Systems that often profoundly reshape and sometimes even directly override our basic biological drives. I'm thinking here about what we could maybe call the big five human inventions built on fiction: religion, power and status, nations, money, and maybe even brands.
That's a great framework. These are indeed monumental pillars of human civilization, and each one is essentially a vast, intricate system of simulacra built upon, but often dramatically altering, our biological foundations. Let's start with religion. At its core, across myriad forms, religion has often concerned itself deeply with regulating sex and procreation. It elevates marriage from just a practical or biological pairing into a sacred covenant, a holy sacrament, imbued with divine significance. Think about the emphasis on purity ideals, on virginity, found in many faiths. Biologically, there's no inherent physical change that makes someone pure or impure based on sexual experience. But religious narratives create these powerful moral categories with real social consequences. Perhaps the most dramatic example of religious fiction overriding a core biological drive is the practice of celibacy. Catholic priests, Buddhist monks and nuns, Hindu sadhus, millions throughout history, and today choose to renounce sexual activity and family life entirely. From a strict evolutionary standpoint, this is the ultimate self-denial, willingly removing oneself from the gene pool. Yet people embrace it because the religious fiction, the narrative of spiritual attainment or service to God, offers a value deemed higher than biological reproduction.
It's truly astonishing how a story can lead people to defy such a fundamental drive. Okay, what about the second one? Power and status. How does fiction operate there?
Well, power and status hierarchies exist in many social animals, based often on strength or dominance displays. But humans have formalized these into incredibly complex systems that rely heavily on fictions of legitimacy. A king or queen historically ruled not just because they had the biggest army, but because people believed in the fiction of their divine right to rule or the sacredness of their bloodline. This fiction of blood purity led to practices like intense inbreeding among European royalty, like the Habsburgs, for example. They married close relatives to keep the royal blood pure, even though it often led to severe genetic defects and health problems. The fiction trumped biological common sense. Things like royal harems or polygamy in certain societies were also often status symbols for powerful men, a visible, living demonstration of their power and wealth, supported by elaborate social rules and narratives to manage succession and alliances. Even think about sumptuary laws in past eras, rules that dictated precisely who could wear certain fabrics, colors, or styles of clothing. These were pure simulacra designed to make social rank instantly visible, enforcing the fiction of a rigid hierarchy. And today, conspicuous consumption buying luxury goods, far beyond their practical utility, serves a similar function. The value isn't primarily in the object itself, but in the fiction of status and exclusivity attached to the brand. It's a performance of economic power.
Right, so we create these elaborate stories to justify power structures, stories that can even harm individuals within them. Now, what about nations? How are they fictional constructs?
Nations are a fascinating case, and Benedict Anderson famously called the nation an imagined political community. And that word imagined is key. Most citizens of even a moderately sized country will never meet, or even know the names of, more than a tiny fraction of their fellow citizens. Yet they often feel a deep sense of kinship, of shared identity, based purely on a shared story, a shared national narrative. Biologically, there's nothing that connects someone from London with someone from Manchester more closely than with someone from Paris, apart from this shared fiction of Britishness. A national flag, as we said, is just cloth. But burning it feels like a personal attack because it has come to symbolize the collective self, the imagined community. National anthems, monuments to fallen soldiers, national holidays, reciting a pledge of allegiance, these are all rituals designed to make the abstract concept of the nation feel concrete and real, to solidify that feeling of comradeship. Anderson points out that people feel this deep horizontal bond with millions of strangers, a bond so powerful that countless individuals have willingly died in wars, sacrificing their lives for this imagined entity, this limited imagining, called their country. Patriotism often functions very much like a secular religion.
It's incredible how a shared story can forge such a potent connection among vast numbers of people who've never met. And money, we touched on it earlier, but why is it one of these grand foundational fictions?
Money is perhaps the most universal fiction of all. As Harari calls it, it's the most universal and efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. And trust is key here, because that's all it really is. Objectively, as we discussed, a dollar bill or a number on a screen has no inherent value. Its power comes entirely from the fact that we all collectively agree that it has value. It's pure shared imagination. Think about its evolution. From early forms like barter to symbolic tokens like cowrie shells to the giant ray stones of Yap Island, which held value even if they were known to be lost at the bottom of the sea, to precious metals, then paper fiat, money backed only by government decree, and now purely digital cryptocurrencies. Each step involved a greater level of abstraction, moving further from tangible value towards pure belief. Money transcended the limitations of barter and allowed for cooperation and trade on a massive global scale, precisely because strangers could trust the fiction even if they didn't trust each other personally. And historically, money has often been intertwined with fictions around procreation too. Think of practices like bride prices or dowries, where monetary value was explicitly assigned to marriage alliances, essentially commodifying aspects of reproduction and lineage within a fictional economic framework.
And the last one on our list, brands. How do they qualify as these grand shaping fictions alongside things like religion and nations?
Well, brands function as a kind of modern mythology, especially in consumer societies. They take ordinary mass-produced commodities and infuse them with specific cultural meanings, ideals, and identities. Apple, for instance, doesn't just sell computers and phones. It sells the fiction of creativity, innovation, minimalist cool, being part of a certain tribe. Nike doesn't just sell athletic shoes. It sells the mythology of personal achievement, overcoming limits, the whole just-do-it ethos. People buy these products not just for their function, but often for the story they tell about the buyer. The brand becomes a badge, a symbol of identity or aspiration. And the ultimate example of a brand creating a powerful cultural fiction is probably the De Beers A Diamond is Forever campaign we mentioned earlier. Launched in the 1930s and 40s, it brilliantly and quite deliberately forged a link between diamonds and eternal love, marriage, and commitment. Before that campaign, diamond engagement rings were not nearly as common or culturally essential as they feel today. De Beers literally invented a tradition through masterful storytelling and marketing.
A corporate fiction reshaped one of our most fundamental life rituals, partnership and family formation. Why spend multiple months' salary on a specific type of compressed carbon? Because the story, the fiction, tells us it's essential to prove true love.
What's truly striking in all this is how these fictions, these simulacra, can evolve beyond just guiding our instincts or structuring our societies. They can actually end up dominating our biological drives. So, what happens when our imagined realities don't just channel our innate impulses, but completely override them, when they lead us to actions that seem to go against our own basic survival or well-being?
That's the crux of the paradox, isn't it? And we see some really extreme, sometimes tragic examples where fictions completely overwhelm basic biological imperatives. Honor killings are a devastating example. The cultural fiction of family honor can become so powerful in certain contexts that it overrides the deep, innate parental instinct to protect one's own child, leading parents or relatives to murder a daughter, for instance, perceived to have brought shame on the family. We've already discussed religious celibacy, the deliberate renunciation of reproduction, a fundamental biological drive, for the sake of a spiritual narrative. Think also about extreme religious fasting, where individuals might suppress the basic drive of hunger, sometimes to the point of endangering their health because the fiction of spiritual purity or devotion demands it. And then there are actions like suicide bombings. Here, the ideological narrative perhaps of martyrdom, achieving paradise, or serving a cause, completely overrides the most fundamental instinct of all, self-preservation. People will endure incredible suffering, inflicted on others, or sacrifice their own lives, not for tangible resources or direct biological gain, but for abstract concepts, for fictions like honor, faith, nation, or ideology. However, it's crucial to remember the other side of this coin. Fictions don't just lead to self-destructive behavior. They can also redirect our raw impulses into structured, often socially productive forms. Sigmund Freud talked about this concept as sublimation. Instead of acting out raw aggression through random violence, societies create fictions like justice and channel aggression into organized sports or legal systems. Sports become a kind of ritualized combat, a way to express tribal loyalties and competitive drives without actual warfare, mostly. Judicial systems provide a framework for resolving conflicts and seeking retribution without resorting to personal vengeance or blood feuds. We trust the fiction of the law. Sexual energy and other powerful drive can be sublimated into artistic creation, scientific discovery, or channeled into the socially sanctioned structure of marriage and long-term pair bonding, itself heavily shaped by cultural fictions. Our drive for dominance and status, instead of leading to constant physical fights, gets redirected into economic competition within the marketplace, or political contests decided by votes rather than force. Even modern digital simulacra striving for likes and status on social media, achieving goals in virtual game worlds, can provide substitute gratifications, channeling some of our drives into these constructed realities. So these fictions, these stories we tell ourselves, they can civilize us, enabling complex cooperation and creativity, or they can drive us to extremes of self-sacrifice or cruelty. But either way, whether for good or ill, they fundamentally rule our lives as humans.
So, if we were to kind of recap the main thread here, humans, it seems, live deeply, profoundly inside stories that we ourselves have created. Our unique power as a species, as Harari and others suggest, really stems from this incredible ability to believe in shared fictions. These fictions, religion, nations, money, laws, brands, they've been the scaffolding for basically every major human endeavor throughout history. It's a really deep insight into what makes us, well, what makes us human.
It truly is. And understanding this is vital. These fictions empower us enormously. They enable cooperation, complex societies, art, science, things unimaginable without shared belief in abstract concepts. But it always comes with that double-edged nature we talked about. The same fictions that unite and empower can also divide, oppress, and lead to tremendous, often needless, suffering. The real danger, perhaps, arises when we forget that our stories are stories. When a particular fiction, a religious doctrine, a political ideology, a national myth starts being treated as an absolute, unshakable truth with a capital T, that's when you get fundamentalism, dogma, the inability to question or adapt. It prevents critical thinking and can lock societies into harmful patterns because the foundational story itself becomes immune to revision. We forget we wrote the script.
And looking ahead, we seem to be entering a new era with another powerful fiction factory coming online, artificial intelligence. AI is becoming increasingly capable of generating incredibly convincing simulacra. It can create images, write text, synthesize voices, craft narratives that are getting harder and harder to distinguish from those created by humans or from reality itself. What might this new wave of powerful, potentially automated fictions mean for us? Could it, I don't know, free us in some way or perhaps enslave us further to illusion?
That is, I think, one of the most critical questions we face right now. AI definitely challenges us, maybe forces us, to become even more fiction aware, more discerning about the narratives we consume and inhabit. We might soon be scrolling through news feeds or interacting online, where some of the people we engage with, some of the stories we react to, are entirely synthetic, yet designed to trigger real emotions and influence real beliefs and behaviors. This could potentially amplify both our collective imagination and creativity, but also our capacity for manipulation and self-deception, perhaps on an unprecedented scale. Now, more than ever, we need the ability to critically assess the stories we're told and the stories we tell ourselves. We need to consciously try to choose and shape fictions, because we will live by fictions that promotes human flourishing, empathy, and cooperation, and minimize harm and division. The hopeful part is that humans don't just create fictions. We also have the unique capacity to revise them. When stories no longer serve us like the divine right of kings or the naturalness of slavery we have shown, albeit often slowly and painfully, that we can change the script. AI could potentially be a tool to help us understand our own biases and write better, more life-affirming stories, but only if we approach it with wisdom and critical awareness.
We are fundamentally storytelling animals, and those stories we live by, they can be cages that confine us, or they can be wings that allow us to soar. The choice, ultimately, as it seems it has always been, is ours.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.